Welcome back, students. Now we come to the next topic, that is towns and trade. So, what was the condition of towns and how was the trade functioning between circa 6th century BC to 6th century CE during these 1000 years? First point, come to first line. Urban centers, come to next line, emerged from circa 6th century BC. Next point, capitals of Mahajanpadas, come to next line, were located along routes of communication. Next point, Patliputra on riverine routes. Next point, Ujjaini land routes. Next point, Puhar near the coast. Next point, Mathura, centers of commercial, cultural and political activity. Many of these towns which had emerged in the 6th century BC, such as Patliputra, it was on the riverline coast and it was used for transportation. Then there is Ujjaini, which was a land route. Then there is Puhar, which is in South India and it is near the sea coast. Now coming to the history of Patliputra. Come to third line, began as a village known as Patligram. Next point, in the 5th century BC, the Magadhan rulers decided to shift their capital from Rajgah to this settlement and renamed it. Next point, it was the capital of the Mauryan Empire. Next point, the Chinese pilgrim Xuan Hang in the 7th century CE found it in ruins and with a very small population. So the Patliputra, as it developed into a big town, earlier it was a small village known as Patligram, and later on when the Mauryan Empire shifted its capital from Rajgira to Patliputra and renamed it as Patliputra, it emerged as a very big center. Later on, when the Chinese pilgrim he visited India in the 7th century CE, that is after almost 1000 years after the Mauryan Empire. So what he finds that Patliputra has been totally destroyed and there is a very small population living now in that place. Now come to urban populations, elites and craft persons. First point, it is difficult to conduct excavations at most sites because people live in these areas even today. You cannot excavate everywhere and try to find out what is there because the people are already living in those places now. Next point, a range of artifacts have been recovered from them. Next point includes fine pottery bowls and dishes with a glossy finish known as northern black polished ware. So this northern black polished ware was the design of the pottery. The pottery has been named, and the features of this pottery was that color which was polished on that was black, and it was having a glossy finish. That means it is very shiny. Next point, ornaments, tools, weapons, vessels, figurines made of gold, silver, copper, bronze, ivory, glass, shell and terracotta. Various craft people are producing various items of gold, silver, whatever metals are available during this period. By the 2nd century BC, we find short votive inscriptions in a number of cities. What are votive inscriptions? Record gifts made to religious institutions. So we find this only in the later period. Next point, mention the name of the donor and specify his occupation as well. Next point, they tell us about people who lived in towns. Next point, guilds or sharons, organizations of craft producers and merchants are mentioned as well. Next point, guilds procured raw material, regulated production, and marketed the finished product. Now, in all these points, what is happening? Votive inscriptions are records of the gifts made to religious institutions or to the Brahmanas. And now we have details about guilds or sharins or associations made of different organizations of craft producers, and these associations or organizations are controlling the all occupations of that town or the city. Now coming to this map, just underline important centers, that is Kushanas, coming here Kanauj, Mathura, Saraswati, Taz, Varanasi, Vaishali, Rajgir, Vidisha, Bharukachas, Satwanas, Cholas, Cheras, Pandyas, Puhar, and Shakas in western parts of India today. Now coming to the next topic, come to next page, trade in the subcontinent and beyond. So how was the trade functioning? First point, from the 6th century BC, land and river routes extended in various directions. Next point, rulers attempted to control these routes. So trade was in various directions, from Central Asia towards the Arabian Sea, from there to East and North Africa, towards West Asia, and even towards Bay of Bengal, Southeast Asia and China. So being conducted in all directions, and mostly all the rulers, empires, they wanted to control all these routes because that is the only way they could earn more. Next point, successful merchants became rich. Next point, a wide range of goods were carried from one place to another. Next point, spices, especially pepper, were in high demand in the Roman Empire, as were textile and medicinal plants. So, जो masalas which were being produced, for example pepper, kali mirch, so they were very much in demand in the Roman Empire. So whatever was being produced in India was going to other places. Next point, coins and kings. This is how we get all the details of the trade conducted in various parts of. Exchanges were facilitated by the introduction of coinage. So as the coin was introduced, it became easy for trade to function. Punch marked coins of silver and copper circa 6th century BC onward were earliest to be minted. So first coins which were, those were known as punch marked coins, and they were actually made of silver and copper and started from 6th century BC onwards. Numismatists studied coins to reconstruct commercial networks. Numismatists are the people who study coins, and they studied coins to reconstruct the commercial networks during the early period. Next point, symbols on coins suggest kings, merchants, bankers, and town people issued these coins. So through the symbols on the coins, we come to know that various people during that time who were very powerful or were very rich, they issued coins, such as kings, merchants, bankers, town people, all these people, they issued coins. The first coins to bear the names and images of rulers were issued by Indo-Greeks. So the first people who issued coins with names and images were by Indo-Greeks. Next point, the first gold coins were issued circa 1st century CE by Kushans. So first gold coins by Kushans, first coins with names and images by Indo-Greeks. This is very important. Now come to the next page. This definition of numismatics is also very important. Then come to the next point. Roman coins have been found archaeological sites in South India. So Roman coins have been found in many places at South India and this suggests that there used to be trade between these both centers. Next point. Coins were also issued by tribal republics such as that of the Yodhyas of Punjab and Haryana circa 1st century CE. So not only kings or empires issued coins, even tribal republics also issued coins, and such example is Yodhyas of Punjab and Haryana. Come to the next point. Most spectacular gold coins were issued by the Gupta rulers. Very good quality of coins were issued by the Gupta rulers. First gold coins were issued by the Kushans, and first coins with images and names of the kings were issued by Indo-Greeks. These all three you have to learn and be very careful with this, because many a times questions come on these. The earliest issues are remarkable for their purity. So the early part of the Gupta Empire, the coins were of very good purity. That means they had very good quality of gold in them. From the circa 6th century CE onwards, finds of gold coin tapers off. That is, after the 6th century CE, the quality of gold coin becomes very less. That means the coins, the gold in that is reducing. And why this happened? Collapse of the Western Roman Empire, long distance trade declined. So as the Roman Indians were having trade relations with the Romans, and as Western Roman Empire declined, so the trade also declined, and thus the purity of the gold in the coins also decreased. Other reasons: new towns and networks of trade started emerging. So maybe there were new towns or new network of trade that started emerging. That is why the quality of gold also in the coins also may have declined. Coins were in circulation rather than being hoarded, or there may have been theory that it may have been coins may have been circulation in the trade, but people were not storing those coins, and thus we do not have any proof of these. Now coming to the next topic, that is back to basics, that how are inscriptions deciphered. This we had studied in the starting of the chapter, how the Brahmi and the Khroshti scripts were deciphered by James Princeps. Now we'll study what was the method adopted to read these scripts. First point, most scripts used to write modern Indian languages are derived from Brahmi, the script used in most Ashokan inscriptions. So the most script used in Ashokan inscription is the Brahmi script, and almost all modern Indian languages have derived their script from the Brahmi script. Next point, European scholars aided by Indian Pandits worked backward from contemporary Bengali and Devanagari, the script used to write Hindi manuscripts, comparing their letters with older specimens. Now what is happening, that to study the past we move from known to the unknown. So what we have with us is the modern languages such as Bengali and the written form of Hindi, which we call Devanagari. So Indian Pandits and with European scholars, to study these Brahmi scripts, we moved from these languages to reading these inscriptions. Next point, scholars assumed these were in Sanskrit, although in Prakrit. Next point, after decades of painstaking investigations, James Prinsep was able to decipher Ashokan Brahmi in 1838. Very important date. Many a times questions is asked that when did James Prinsep decipher Ashokan Brahmi script? It was in 1838. Earlier they thought that it was actually in Sanskrit language, but the inscription was Prakrit language and the script was Brahmi and Khroshti and other scripts. Now, how did they read Khroshti? So next subtopic is how Khroshti was read. First point, Khroshti, the script used in inscriptions in the West, is different. Next point, the Khroshti script was used in the northwestern parts of the Indian subcontinent. Next point, coins of Indo-Greek kings, come to next page, contain names of kings written in Greek and Khroshti script. This we had read earlier also, that the first coins issued with names and images were by the Indo-Greeks. So these coins were having script that was written in Greek and Khroshti. Next point, European scholars who could not read the former means Greek, compared the letters. Next point, with Prinsep identifying the language of the Khroshti inscription as Prakrit, it became possible to read longer inscriptions as well. So once James Prinsep came to know that it was not Sanskrit language but Prakrit language, and through that they managed to read Khroshti with the help of Greek script being used together. Subtopic, historical evidence from inscriptions. So what are the historical evidence we can match with the inscriptions? First point, the name of the ruler Ashoka is not mentioned in the inscription. Next point, instead titles adopted by the ruler, Devanpiya meaning beloved of the god, and Piyadashi or pleasant to behold. Inscriptions have no name as Ashoka but only the titles such as Devanpiya and Piyadashi. Next point, after examining all inscriptions and match in content, style, language and paleography. Paleography means structure of the language. Epigraphists have concluded that they were issued by the same ruler. So various inscriptions at various places in the Mauryan Empire under Ashoka, the historians come to know that these inscriptions were associated with the same ruler, and the inscriptions are common to one king because of the content, style, language, etc. Next point, subtopic we make, circle this. Historians have to constantly assess statements made in inscription. So circle this. Historians actually do not get all the details in the inscriptions. So they have to judge them on the basis of sentence being made or on the capacity of letters to be adjusted. So what are they? First point, to judge whether they are true, plausible or exaggerations. So historians have to be very careful that are they really true? Can they be believed? Or is it exaggerated on the king? Next point, epigraphists add, instead of these write brackets to make the meaning of sentence clear. For example, in an inscription, some letters or words have been erased with time. So what historians do, they put a bracket out there and add whatever meaning to make that sentence clear. Come to the next page. Next point, king's orders inscribed on natural rocks near cities or important routes of communication. So kings, to make their orders to be followed by the people, they had these inscriptions done on natural rocks near the cities or on the important routes of communication on the roads, etc. Next point, answers to such questions are not always easy to find. Now the answer to this question, that why did kings make these inscriptions, why did they put them on important routes or in the cities, this question cannot be easily answered by historians. Historians have to depend on whatever knowledge they trying to gain through these archaeological finds. Now coming to the next topic, that is the limitation of inscriptional evidences. What are the limitations the historians face? First point, letters are very faintly engraved. That is, the inscriptions we are reading now are more than 1000 years old, 2000 years old, 2500 years old, and thus what is happening, that letters are rubbed off, letters are not clear, and thus they have to study them very carefully. Next point, inscriptions may be damaged or letters missing. Next point, meaning of the words, come to next line, may be specific to a particular place or time. So the word which was used 2500 years earlier may have changed its meaning to the present time. Next point, not all have been disappeared. Many inscriptions have not survived the ravages of time. So all inscriptions have not been disappeared, as they have been eroded with time, they have been rubbed off with time, and the inscriptions are not clear. So that is why we do not have full details about these inscriptions. Next point, not everything, come to next page, recorded in inscriptions. That means that inscriptions did not record everything what was happening during that times. There are many things which may have been missed by these inscriptions. So historians have to be very careful to reconstruct the past. Now with this we come to end of this chapter. Thank you all.